Good morning, everyone. This is the February meeting of the Safety Committee, MTA Safety Committee. Before we get started with anything, I would like David Mayer to give a review of the safety procedures we have in place for utilization of this room and this building. It's new to many people, but in the event of our need to leave, I want to make sure he can explain to you what you would be expected to do. David?
Thank you. Just a few quick safety words. This building is equipped with an emergency generator, and in the event of a power failure, the lights and electrical power will be restored after a few moments, and the public address system in the building will continue to operate. So if we should have a power failure, we'll just wait here for instructions. If an alarm sounds during our meeting, unless we see smoke or flames, we'll await instructions from the public address system. If we're told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, we'll leave all unessential items here and use the stairs that are just across the main hallway from where I'm sitting. And finally, if it should become necessary, the closest AED defibrillator is located in the main hall just past the elevators. So this morning, I believe we just have one public speaker.
Before we get to that, this is more of logistics and housekeeping. For those of you that attended the committee meetings on Monday, everybody, it was new, but these are wireless mics, but they're very directional. So it's essential that you talk into the mic and don't turn away when you talk, because then you won't be picked up not only by the PA system, but by the electronic recording devices we have to record the meeting. So anyone who is speaking in front of a mic, if you just keep that in mind, that you direct your comments into the mic, and then there will be publicly broadcast, but also recorded. Do we have any public speakers, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, we have Murray Bowden.
I've brought a 6-inch ruler because that's what they said on. My name is Murray Bowden. I live in Hartsdale, New York, and my birth date is June 11, 1933. I want to make sure I'm clearly identified, so if I'm called to testify in court, they know it's me. 4 days after Memorial Day in 2012 in Texas, a freight train hit a trailer in the Veterans Day parade. The federal inspector, in charge, was Mark Rosekind. Mark Rosekind was also the voice at the Riverdale accident. I emailed Mark and I asked him about what was going on, and he emailed me back and said, tradition is hard to change. Certainly is. I have his email copies there. He's now confirmed as head of the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency. 3 weeks ago, we were in Cuba, and in crossing the island, we crossed a railroad crossing. You, of course, know that most of the cars in Cuba are of 1955 models, the same as when I graduated college. The railroad lights there were exactly the same as the ones in Valhalla and used throughout here. On Monday, I spoke at a number of meetings and I said, it is easy to upgrade those lights. You can do it by requesting permission to experiment. I'm making this statement quite complete because it is now your responsibility. May I finish? I'd rather finish it here than in a board meeting. It is your responsibility, because it can be upgraded, to do whatever it needs to be done. You can get permission, and that permission will come down. This is what I said at the New Jersey Transit meeting last week. Within 3 hours. I asked you about that at the board meeting in December. I've never gotten an answer. Senator Blumenthal yesterday issued a statement, and one of the things he said, far too many crossings nationwide rely on 19th century technology.
We need you to conclude your remarks, sir.
Certainly. I'll leave these with you. It's your responsibility to move this forward, no longer mine. Could you pass these up, please? Thank you.
No. That concludes the public speakers. May I have an approval of the minutes from the last Safety Committee meeting? Motion. Second. Any discussion or comments? All in favor? Aye. Okay, there's one item on the agenda. It's grade crossing safety. David will start a discussion. I'll follow up. We'll have further discussion. The primary focus will be to provide factual information on the most recent incident that happened on Metro North, what we call a Valhalla incident a few weeks back. Just yesterday, there was another incident within the United States with a commuter rail on a Metro link in California. It is a national issue, it is a high visibility issue, and it's a serious issue. So what I really want to accomplish today in the hour that we have budgeted for this time, but we'll take whatever time it takes, is to have an engaged discussion with the board to make sure that we're answering questions of fact related to questions you may have, but also make sure and understand what we're going to do moving forward, not only in relation to the accident and supporting the NTSB, but grade crossing safety in general. David?
So at the risk of starting kind of with very basic information, a grade crossing is a location where a highway or another road or sidewalk crosses railroad tracks at grade at the same level as the street. Crossings present a unique safety issue because two different modes of transportation intersect. Nationwide, in the 1970s, there were about 1,000 fatalities and about 4,000 injuries every year at grade crossings. The accident statistics have improved significantly since then. Nationwide, in 2013, there were about 2,000 vehicle-train collisions, resulting in 251 fatalities and 929 injuries. That's across the whole country. In the United States, there are more than 212,000 grade crossings, most of which are passive, meaning they do not have warning or protective devices like flashers, bells, or gates that are activated by the presence of a train. Crossings that do have devices that are activated by the presence of a train are called active crossings. So crossings are either described as passive or active. There's another way to categorize crossings, whether it's public or private. If the roadway at the crossing is under the jurisdiction of a public highway authority and generally open to motorists, then it's a public crossing. If the roadway at the crossing is privately owned and not generally intended to be open to motorists, then it's called a private crossing. So this slide shows that on the Long Island Railroad, there are 334 grade crossings. 289 are public crossings, and the remaining 45 are private crossings. There are a total of 296 active crossings, including 294 that are protected by gates. On the Metro North Railroad, there are 103 crossings. 71 are public, and 32 are private. There are a total of 82 crossings with active devices, including 76 with gates. So this slide just summarizes the number of grade crossings across both MTA railroads, 437 total. On Long Island Railroad crossings over the last 3 years, there have been 11 collisions between trains and highway vehicles. These accidents resulted in 5 injuries and 3 fatalities. On Metro North crossings over the same period, not including the Valhalla accident, there were 5 collisions between trains and highway vehicles. These resulted in 2 fatalities and 5 injuries. One question that is sometimes asked is who is responsible for doing what at crossings? There is regulation and involvement at the federal, state, and local levels of government. With respect to the federal government, there are several federal agencies that play a regulatory role pertaining to crossings. The 2 main agencies are the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA, and the Federal Highway Administration, the FHWA. The FRA is the primary regulatory agency for railroads. With respect to crossings, the FRA collects and analyzes extensive data about crossing accidents, and it uses this data to set standards for regulations at crossings. The FHWA publishes the Grade Crossing Handbook, which is essentially a best practice and standards guide for crossings and crossing improvements. And in addition to administering some sources of funding that can be used to improve crossings, the FHWA also publishes the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD, which state and local governments must follow to ensure that signs and signals that motorists and pedestrians see at crossings and everywhere else are uniform throughout the country. I mention state and local government because surface roads and signs are usually maintained by either a State Department of Transportation or a local municipal government. These entities are responsible for selecting and maintaining appropriate highway traffic control devices, roadway signage, and pavement markings. State and local governments work with the railroads to determine the need for any interconnections between railroad signal systems and highway traffic signals. So that brings us to the role of railroads. Railroads inspect and maintain their track, signals, crossing surfaces, and of course any active warning devices at crossings. So the responsibility for maintaining crossbucks, flashers, bells, and gates lies with the railroads. Locomotive engineers are required to sound the train's horn on approach to public crossings, and all trains must comply with conspicuity, lighting, and exterior reflectorized tape requirements. There's an additional organization that I want to mention, and that's Operation Lifesaver. Operation Lifesaver is a nonprofit educational organization that was established in 1972 with the mission of ending collisions at crossings. Its programs are sponsored cooperatively by the railroad industry, government agencies, and highway safety organizations. And we use Operation Lifesaver material as the basis for our safety and educational outreach activities to increase public awareness and safety around railroad tracks and railroad property. MTA outreach activities educate our community by sharing safety information about grade crossings, as well as more general topics such as exercising proper caution when boarding or exiting trains. We offer education programs to civic groups, community events, and as part of driver education, both for brand new drivers as well as professional drivers. These programs improve safety awareness and remind everyone that safety is our top priority.
I'm going to now provide a brief synopsis of the factual information we know related to the incident. In no way, shape, or form do I do want to get to a point. If board members have questions, you're able to ask them. We can have a dialogue to make sure you understand the facts, but also if you've got other concerns. As a party to the investigation that is being led by the NTSB, we have specific requirements that we can't get into issues beyond facts. If we get into a discussion that talks about conjecture or deliberation or things that may be related to what the NTSB needs to do between now and when they issue their final report, I really need to trim that conversation to make sure we stay within the scope of what we're allowed to do as a party. So if I do that, it's only with the purpose of staying within that scope. Because if they ever reach a finding or conclusion on their own that parties are deviating from that, you're asked to not be part of the investigation. That actually happened with Spite and Dival with one of the parties. Summary of the incident, many of you know. I forget the exact train number, but it departed, train number was 769. It departed Grand Central approximately 5:45. Its first scheduled stop in revenue service was Chappaqua. So subject to track occupancy ahead or whatever civil speed restrictions, the locomotive engineer would be required to operate that train in following those requirements. But the first scheduled stop would not be until Chappaqua. The train didn't reach that point. As it approached the grade crossing at Commerce Street, which is in Valhalla, and these are facts that the NTSB has already mentioned, the locomotive engineer saw the gate sequence start. The gate sequence starts approximately 3,000 feet before that crossing, so that the gates will be fully down and the lights flashing in sufficient time to meet the FRA requirement, I believe, of 30 seconds. But they were down a full 39, the sequence started 39 seconds before. As the locomotive engineer saw the gates coming down, he saw what he thought was a shadow or something of a hood of a vehicle. And then as he became closer, he saw the vehicle come on the right-of-way, at which point he applied the train's emergency brakes. And then he remained in the cab. The train consist, which was made up of all MU, multiple unit equipment, hit the vehicle in the grade crossing, pushed it forward a distance of some hundreds of feet. I think the closing speed, the time impact speed was 48 miles an hour. Event recorders verified this, so it's not just the testimony of the locomotive engineer. The vehicle was pushed a distance in front of the train, few hundred feet, contacted the third rail on the left side. By the time the train came to a complete stop, there was explosions, there were fire. The locomotive engineer was not injured. There were a number of injuries. All the casualties were in the first car. There were 5 fatalities in the first car and 1 fatality in the automobile. People self-evacuated. The FRA standards today for construction of railroad equipment require every window to be able to, you can pull on the weather stripping, that will come loose, you can push the window out, and you can self-evacuate. There was a response by a number of emergency service entities in the area relatively immediately. The fire needed to be extinguished. It was done. And then rescue efforts emanated from that. The other, some findings that are fact, a number of sections of third rail penetrated the car from the underbody and came into the first car. 1 actually went near the roof section into the second car. I don't believe there are any injuries in any car other than the first car. And given the magnitude of the force of the collision, from a crashworthiness standpoint, the car held up very well. But I'm actually going too far on that. The MTA should state that. The third rails did come into the car, and there was a fire. There was a significant fire inside the car that took a while to be extinguished. The signal system was tested. At that particular location, there had been I think a head-on collision on the Taconic Parkway, which is immediately adjacent to that. So people were self-detouring around that by going over a grade crossing, I believe is it Lakeview or Railroad Avenue? Lakeview Avenue, going through a cemetery on the west side of the right-of-way and coming out at Commerce Street. So there were many people that were doing that. There was an eyewitness account, which the NTSB stated, of the person who was in the car immediately behind the person that was in the vehicle that got struck. That person that was in that vehicle, I think it was a Mercedes SUV, was past the gate. When the sequence started, the gate came down on the back of the driver's car. The driver got out of the car, walked to the back, saw the gate, made some motion with the gate. I believe the eyewitness stated that he motioned to her to back up. He backed up. She got back in the car. There was a period of time, saw nothing. I think he then saw the brake lights come on, then he saw the car move forward, and about approximately 2 seconds later, 3 seconds later, the train hit the car. Obvious areas of interest, they're trying to find out, the actions of the driver. The driver is deceased. They tested the signal system to make sure that it was operating as designed so that the gate circuit started when it was supposed to start, like I said, 3,000 feet back. But it also makes sure that it's tied in with the traffic light that is on the other side of the railroad tracks of Commerce Street. Because when that sequence starts, what you want to be able to do is turn that light cycle to green so that all the traffic on the other side of the tracks hopefully can exit that area, and anybody who would be stuck on the crossing could leave. And that was all tested and found to be fine. Areas of interest will be, they're going to look at from a human factor standpoint, talking to all the customers that were on board that first car that suffered casualties. They will look at the medical examiner's report with respect to the fatalities. They will try to make determinations as to, there's questions about the vehicle itself and how you can put it in forward and reverse. And then the other issue that they're going to look at is how the third rail penetrated the car and what impact that had. For all of us that have been in the business, another thing I probably need to state, because it goes kind of on what David was saying in terms of the history of grade crossings. We run the 2 largest commuter railroad systems in the country. Sometimes Metro-North is number 1, sometimes Long Island Railroad is number 1, but they're the 2 largest by far. The number of train movements, I think 1,500 between the 2. At the time, the Long Island Railroad was first put into service in the 19th century, and New York Central started operating its service on the Harlem line in the 19th century. Many of the communities we currently go in either didn't exist or they were very small bedroom communities. Today, they're very large communities. If you take a look at the Long Island Railroad in Mineola, if you drop somebody in to Mineola from someplace else, they think they were in an urban city. It's that dense, it's that urban. And these trains go maximum authorized speed 79 miles an hour. So the fact that, a safest grade crossing or a safe grade crossing is no grade crossing whatsoever. But in some cases, it's impossible to do that. There was a bad accident at Herrick's Road on Long Island Railroad about 25 years ago. I believe there were a number of people in the van. There was only one survivor, happened to be the daughter of the Senate Transportation Committee Chair, John Kammerer, and $85 million was spent to make that a grade-separated grade crossing. I believe, was the other one that was done on Long Island? Was it Mineola? I'm sorry? Roslyn Road. but they're generally scores of millions of dollars to do in those kind of environments. That's the ideal way, but it's impossible to do that. In some cases, if you've got problems with people driving around gates, they put quad gates in, so they can't do that. But at the end of the day, it's the following of the FHWA, MUTCD as MCTD, MUCCD code regarding what level of protection you need to have at crossings, and a constant level of awareness on the part of all the operating employees, but also the people who traverse that grade crossing. We will continue with the investigation. We will not wait for the investigation to be complete to take actions that we believe are necessary. And in fact, the NTSB, if they believe that during the course of the investigation, before they finalize it, there's something we need to take action with, they will issue an interim recommendation. And we are going to do some things in advance of that report being finalized. I think now we can probably go back to you, or we can open it up for conversation. Any questions regarding the facts, where we're going? I will come back and say that we do have some things that we want to do, but I can right now just make sure that if you've got any questions regarding facts or what we know as a result. Ann? Thank you.
Has it been ascertained yet whether the fire was caused by impact or the third rail becoming in contact with the front head car?
That's part of the investigation. There's a gas tank on the car. Obviously, the third rail is electrified. The way electric traction systems are designed, that if you have they have different names people give for it, but if you have a electrical short where you have high current draw, tens of thousands of amps usually, or thousands of amps, the circuit breaker opens so that you don't have continuous power being supplied to something and be an ignition source. That's part of the investigation, to make sure that that operated as designed. And there's been a lot of conversation about underrunning, overrunning third rail, and that'll be sorted out during the investigation. But there were some comments saying the only place around with the underrunning third rail is Metro North, and that's not true. There are systems around the world that have underrunning third rail. The Market Frankfurt subway in Philadelphia has an underrunning third rail. Chuck?
Mr. Chairman, mindful of your admonition to stay away from the facts in Valhalla, let me focus on the Long Island Railroad, which is not under investigation today. The Valhalla crossing was rated by the FRA as having an accident prediction value of 3%, a little above it. There are about 129 crossings on the Long Island Railroad which have an FRA rating higher than Valhalla. And my questions are focused on Long Island for reasons that will become obvious in a minute. Would there be a value in the legislature enacting legislation, some of which you had urged years ago, that would provide that localities would be authorized to install in and around grade crossings in both Westchester and all of the areas served by Metro North and the Long Island Railroad, of grade crossing cameras to detect those drivers who go deliberately through the grade crossing signals, and just as with the red light cameras in New York, would have the power to punish those people and start establishing a practice. It would be a locality-based decision, which is where the responsibility properly lies, and it would, in my view, properly include revocation of a driver's license if a person were convicted of having done that. And so that is the first question, and I have one other one after that, if I may.
In response to that, I'd like to say that whether one puts a camera on for enforcement and the assessment of fines, which clearly could be done with red light cameras or grade crossing cameras, they're informative from the standpoint of trying to determine what actual behavior is. If a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there, does it make a sound? If you don't know what the behavior is because you don't observe it with your own eyes, the ability to have a 24-hour camera captured image that you can, every 30 days it gets reprogrammed, or you have images, you can see what the behavior is. So at a minimum, that would be advantageous, and especially at those crossings where we felt we had a high-profile protection. But I'm sure that will be part of the dialogue, maybe in the NTSB investigation, but certainly in the dialogue we would have, because when I was Long Island Railroad president, I think 2 years straight, we went forward with a proposal to put up cameras, but I can't remember if it was tied to enforcement or just the issue of trying to find out whether people were going around gates.
I think you were derailed in the legislature when you tried to do that.
I think we used another term. We were just...
Not in this context, with respect.
I believe they were, I remember most things, but I can't remember if it was the issue of the enforcement and the fining, or the issue of invasion of,
I took a look at that, and if I may, that's why I said this should be a locality-based thing. If, for example, the communities that represent the 129 grade crossings that have a more dangerous rating in Long Island Railroad than Valhalla did, if they were to determine not to enforce the law, then the responsibility would be clearly fixed, namely that of the locality. And that would put the onus, in my view, on both the legislature to take steps and upon the locality to respond, rather than putting the onus on a state public authority that is doing its very best with exceptionally limited resources to try and do a good job. Let me turn to the second part, if I may.
I'd like to respond to that, and then you can go to the next question. I spent 10 years of my career in safety, system safety, identification of hazards, assessment of their severity and likelihood of occurrence. I think the primary focus we would have is the MTA, not discounting what you're saying in terms of the fine and having other people do some enforcement, is the issue of, do we need to change behavior, and how do we change behavior? Because the most important thing is, when people don't understand the level of the hazard they could experience by acting a certain way, a behavior that's unacceptable, you have to change it. You have to educate them. Like, how many people, when they do their home projects, use a drill and don't put wear on, and then you show them a picture of somebody who has a drill bit in their eye, and they say, well, maybe I need to put eye protection on. But the issue of changing behavior is the primary focus we want to focus on.
Chairman, I couldn't agree with you more. As I told you, I think yesterday or the day before, I nearly got caught in one of those a couple of years ago. The second question I have is the following. Would there be value in the placement of sensors in and around the area of the grade crossing that would alert the driver or the engineer of the train that there is an unusual weight, namely a truck, a car, or what have you, on the grade crossing? And if the answer to that is maybe, but it's very expensive, would there be value in the senator from Connecticut, who loves to make this point from time to time, in introducing legislation to provide funding so that that could be accomplished? It seems to me that the answer to these kind of issues is to use them as a lesson so it doesn't repeat itself, and for those who speak on the subject to also act on the subject and not just regret that the event occurred. And the question is, would there be value in those sensors, assuming financial capacity?
I don't think the question can be answered today by me singularly yes or no. Clearly, anything that provides additional information to someone who is operating a train, locomotive engineer or train operator, to tell them of something they may see or she may see coming down the track, is valuable. What they do with that information has to be assessed, because in some cases, if the information comes so late, there's nothing they can do from a physics standpoint, stopping the train. You have to evaluate that. But that's what system safety is about. Identification of a hazard, its severity, its likelihood of occurrence, and what are the mitigation factors you can apply to either eliminate the hazard or significantly reduce its likelihood of occurrence. So it is certainly, I think the NTSB will look at that. I think the industry will look at that. And as technology becomes available in terms of how we can detect things in the physical presence of the train right away, we need to evaluate that.
Mr. Chairman, finally, let me just say, I know of no person who is more knowledgeable, more caring, and more aware of the problems and desirous of solving them than you are, sir. And I would focus on the third part, if I may. Because I deliberately want to stay away from Westchester County and Metro North for the reasons you have indicated. I wonder, is there something that the people in Long Island, in the two counties that are affected, Nassau and Suffolk, can do and should do, bearing in mind that you have 129 railroad crossings that have a more dangerous calculator by the Federal Railway Administration for accident prediction than Valhalla had. Now that's a rhetorical question, and I understand that, but its purpose is to try and make a point to the people in Long Island. They got to do what they got to do to get it done right for the prevention of accidents that kill people, and they've got real problems.
I'll respond and then we'll open it up because I know some other board members have questions. When I was president of the railroad, I believe there were 308 active crossings, and they've reduced that number down to 296. The first focus is to eliminate, and then there's an FRA. I think an FRA, it's not a mandate as much as it's a mantra. If you open up one new one, you got to close two. And so those are philosophical and policy things that we need to aspire to. We are going to, after we have this discussion on facts, have a discussion about what the railroads do and what we may be able to do to supplement what they do in the sense of awareness and additional protection. Andrew?
I'm wondering if there's any value in signage at crossings. I seem to recall when Penn Central first started their Metroliner service, there were at that time some grade crossings in rural Maryland and Delaware, and they had a sign that said, maybe you can beat the train, maybe you're dead wrong. When I was in Britain, there were signs that says it takes the train 7.6 seconds from the time you see it till the time it's here. Don't be a statistic. Is there any value in putting signage like these, or is that just pretty obvious?
All those are, and when we get to the discussion about what we're going to do and tap resources of people that have made a career out of grade crossing safety, we'll get into a discussion of some of those things.
Maybe, I don't know whether now or you want to get to it later, but David, could you give us, obviously, in the statistics you showed in relation to the variety of grade crossings, no two grade crossings are exactly alike based upon the number of vehicles that transverse it both ways, the number of trains that come by in any hour, and the number of cars or vehicles that cross the railroad crossing depending upon the density or the traffic in that area and the number of pedestrians in that area. I would assume that because different crossings are different in those regards, the safety standards at crossings are different based upon some calculation of that aspect. Because what may be appropriate at one crossing, which has one train and one car an hour, may not be appropriate at a crossing that has 50 trains and 5,000 cars an hour. Many of those locations happen to be on Long Island because of the density of where the trains go. So my question is, how do we determine, or who determines, what is necessary and required at different crossings, and what do they base that on?
You're absolutely right. Every crossing is a unique engineering problem. The number of variables that have to be considered is huge. You mentioned a few of them. Others have to do with sight distance, the actual geometry of the crossing, the angle at which the roadway and the railroad intersect, the speed of trains, the frequency of trains. The number of variables is really huge, and that means that every solution at every crossing has to be tailored to the specific circumstances at the crossing. And Some of that is the railroad's responsibility. Some of that is local highway and municipality responsibility. Particularly advanced signs, pavement markings, and other traffic control devices, they're called, that are designed to communicate information to motorists is usually the responsibility of a local or a state entity. And the sort of the short answer to how do you determine what's warranted, and or warrants is actually the term that's used in traffic safety engineering, is by applying the standards that are set forth in the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Applying those standards allows highway safety engineers to tailor a solution that's specific to the crossing, while also providing standardized markings and signage that a motorist will already be familiar with.
And then it also takes into account the requirements on the railroad for the lights and gates and other equipment that is appropriate at that crossing from a railroad perspective.
Yes, the grade crossing handbook and other regulatory materials from the FRA dictate what's warranted from the railroad's point of view, and then there are certain circumstances, as the chairman mentioned, where railroad signals may be interconnected with highway signals, and that's an engineering accomplishment that's done in cooperation with the railroad and the local authorities.
There's joint responsibility between the traffic, in this case New York State DOT, and us. So the railroad does its piece in terms of the signal circuits it has to initiate the starting of the cycle, but also the sending of a signal to what they call preemptively change the traffic light signal. You start at the base requirements of what MUTCD, the manual calls for, but then you can enhance it. Earlier in my career, I worked at Chicago Transit Authority. I don't know exactly how many, but they still have grade crossings at the Chicago Transit Authority, not commuter rail. They have them on at least 3 or 4 lines. And we had a number of grade crossings over major arterials, and they, at the time, they had to approach it from a standpoint, people just driving around gates, putting in quad gates, make sure people weren't driving around gates. So what a local railroad or a local jurisdiction will do is, at a minimum, meet the basic requirement, but then enhance upon that in order to control behavior or provide additional levels of protection because there's behavior that is unwarranted.
Permit me, if I may, am I correct, however, that the roadway leading to the grade crossing is the responsibility of the locality or of the entity that manages that roadway?
The roadway is the responsibility of either state DOT or the local municipality, depending upon the specific road in question. In some cases, if it's a highway and it's a state highway, it would be state DOT. If it's a local road or a small arterial, it would be the local jurisdiction. Could be at a county level, could be at a city level.
Forgive me if
I'm sorry, go ahead.
if I'm getting on to the actual accident, so we can talk generically. Do these grade crossings that are beyond a station know if the train is scheduled to stop at that station and allow more time for the arms to be down versus an express train that is roaring through a station?
You're not getting into details related to Valhalla, but you are getting into details with respect to enhanced technology at grade crossings. Most of the circuits we have and most of the circuits in the country will assume the fastest train meeting the minimum 30-second. I think the minimum standard is from the time the sequence starts until the train reaches the crossing can be no less than 30 seconds. But then that means you have to do it for your fastest train. So if it's designed for a 60-mile-an-hour service, but the train that actually activates a circuit, it's 30 seconds. So it takes twice as long for the train to get there. When I was at the Long Island Railroad, we'd look at ways of, especially in Nassau County, could we have predictive signaling that didn't, because the longer the gates are down, that impedes traffic flow and creates other problems. We've never been able to get the science right. As a matter of fact, I believe in the Danbury branch we had predictive signaling, predictive grade crossing signaling, and there were some difficulties associated with it. So the answer to your question is, there are those that say the technology exists. There are those that on the operating side say the technology hasn't been proven. Norman?
Yeah, we try to stay on facts as much as we can in all this discussion. It's not easy when a lot of the discussion has to evolve around technologies that presently do not exist. So, you know, whether you call that a fact or not, I don't know. But
I think the fact issue, Norman, is limited to the issue of facts related to Valhalla. If we're talking about grade crossing in general, we're talking about other areas, that's a different story. But
well, I think
if we were to draw conclusions from facts from Valhalla, that's where they don't want us to go.
Well, we'll try to stay with the who, what, when, where, why of Valhalla. The fact is the chief technology that saves lives in these situations is grade crossings, that's a technology as well. And that the value of the grade crossing is not limited to the, I mean, if it was just strictly $80 million down a toilet, then it would be $80 million that was dedicated strictly to safety and nothing else. But there are operational values to grade crossing separations, which I think you know way more about than I. Although I suppose quite a few signalmen will lose their jobs if you grade crossed as many areas as you would probably like to. But that central area in Nassau County along the main line that has resisted grade separation improvements for a long period of time. The localities have sat on many proposals for grade separation in that area for a long period of time. And in a way now, the fact is that they're setting up situations for future interface between vehicles and the equipment that will put people in a position where these accidents can happen. And the longer those gates are down, the more drivers are inclined to do the insane thing of trying to drive around the signals, which they have a history of that in Long Island and elsewhere in the world as well. The drivers are not patient enough to sit there and wait 45 seconds for the track to clear, so they have to speed up, get stuck in the track, whatever. This is the common behavioral paradigm for the vehicles that are crossing those tracks. Now, we know that the operational importance of mainline, third track, grade separation along that right-of-way is critical to developing the market for Long Island Railroad in terms of reverse commute, in terms of access for people from Queens to Long Island. It's critical to the future efficiency of the Long Island Railroad, and, by the way, it makes it safe for the vehicles, and the automobiles will actually be able to cross north and south, across the main line north and south while the equipment's running. Everybody knows this exists. This situation exists. I would think it would be our job on the board to set standards for the capital plan to include those improvements in the capital plan, and not to disagree too much with what Chuck said, but the localities perhaps are not the proper entities for making these sort of decisions. That perhaps this is a decision better made on a macro level of the entire MTA region to say, no, we need access to the right-of-way there and grade separation in that particular location. Yeah, the other locations are important as well, but we know that that particular location is critical and has set up a lose-lose situations at some point in the future. All the behavioral changes, all the gizmos, all the technologies you add to the system at great expense will not be as valid as the technology we know it exists, which is grade separation.
Couldn't agree with you more. I think that where the conversation gets more complicated and more detailed is that from a system safety standpoint, what you do is identify all your hazards and identify the severity of that hazard and its likelihood of occurrence. And then you, in a hierarchical fashion, apply your resources to the ones that are, the terms used in Mill Standard 882B or C, I think it's C, is the worst hazard is one that is catastrophic, potential loss of life or loss of system. It goes through, I think, serious, marginal, and negligible, but I may have the numbers wrong, and then it's the probabilistic determination. So if you have a high likely catastrophic, that's going to get prior attention before a marginal negligible, marginal hazard severity, negligible priority. Negligible likelihood of occurrence. So there isn't enough money to deal with every hazard that the organization faces, but there are some that just need to get done. And I think the recognition that $85 million was spent at Herrick's Road, Roslyn Road was grade separated when they rebuilt the street. I think DOT, and so there's a healthy tension dialogue with respect to that. And we need to play a role. You're absolutely right, because we run the trains over those tracks and we contribute to the hazard. Any other questions? Ira?
No, just more a comment. I mean, I don't want to associate myself with Commissioner Brown's comments, especially regarding grade separation in Nassau County. I think I trust you'll do a systems approach. You know, the thing that gets me is the 30-second thing. Should there be more time? And I understand the psychology. You put more time on, especially on Long Island. The gates will never be up, and then you'll have a situation where people go across. But 30 seconds isn't much time. If you're sitting there, it's a lot of time. But as far as the train going down the track and what people think, it's not. And people getting stuck in railroad crossings, I recommend New York Times put up a video of a crossing in New Jersey, which was not perpendicular; it was at an angle. And the confusion at that crossing, just the short time they were there, it was shocking to see, because people were not knowing where to stop. They were on the wrong side of the gate when they did stop. I don't think we don't have a crossing rated as bad as that. But the traffic volume across our crossings on Long Island is tremendous, to the point where in some situations we'll be seeing people have to make the judgment of whether, when the gate's up, whether to go across because traffic is backed up because of a traffic signal down there. I know we do have a crossing in Queens. It's not a passenger line. It's the Montauk Division, which has that type of situation where you have people coming across the crossing and there might be traffic on the other side. That the choice is to cross the crossing and possibly hit a truck, or wait on the other side, or stop on the crossing. So there's certain places like that where there's actually heavy traffic where I think we need a systems analysis for some of these crossings, and I trust that because of this accident, we'll take a better look at them and see if we can get a recommendation, despite what local people say.
If I remember correctly, most of the Department of Motor Vehicle books that I read before I passed the driver's exam in each one of the states I've lived in, or provinces, there was a requirement such that you did not enter a grade crossing until there was sufficient clearance on the other side of the grade crossing for your vehicle to be. And if that is lost on people that are driving vehicles, we need to write that, because the best thing you can do is never put yourself in a position where you're at risk. The thing that is very difficult about a grade crossing, we had a short discussion a minute ago about predictive grade crossings. It would be ideal if, irrespective of speed of train, the cycle was exactly the same, 30 seconds, 34, whatever. But they're not predictive signals. So they're designed for the fastest train. So I'll just give you physics numbers. If a train's traveling at 60 miles an hour and it's got to have 30 seconds, you run the numbers, and that's what it is. If a following train operates at 15, you'll have twice as many seconds between when the cycle starts and the train gets there. If a freight train operating at 15 miles an hour, you have 4 times the time. And so what happens in a person's mind is, the train's not coming. This is an inactive gate. It's a gate failure. I'm going to drive around the gate. So it's a whole psyche that's there. What I'd like to do now is talk about what we're doing, because we're not going to just wait for the NTSB, but we are going to continue to be a party with the NTSB. There is a group called Operation Lifesaver. Its executive director is Joyce Rose. I've had a conversation with her. Anybody who has been in the business for as long as the railroaders in the room or whatever know very clearly who Operation Lifesaver is. NTSB knows who Operation Lifesaver is. They've made a career out of educating the public and working with municipalities, state DOTs, local DOTs, and railroads to do whatever needs to be done to raise the level of awareness. I've contacted her. There's a local representative here. One of the first things we want to do is take a look at what each one of our railroads does with respect to outreach on grade crossing safety, and make sure that we're picking best practices from each of the agencies and coupling them together. We need to have, much the same way MUCTD has to have uniformity so you don't have different set of rules in one state versus another, we should be messaging the same. and we're going to reach out to Operation Lifesaver because they have made it their business to find out what are the most effective ways at educating people and getting to change behavior. And we want to do it in a way where we're not trying to blame motorists to be their own victim, and certainly not in this case. We want to do it to raise the level of awareness, raise the level of sensitivity, because clearly, just based on my experience, if I'm approaching a grade crossing and the sequence starts, I slowly bring my car to a stop. If I'm the first car, I make sure I bring it to a stop as fast as safely possible. I do, so everybody backs up behind me. But if I'm actually, because there are times you are traversing the crossing when the sequence starts, the hair in the back of my neck stands up. I want to get across that crossing. I want to get out. And there are some parts of this country where you have 4 and 5 tracks that you're crossing, and you've got commuter trains, you've got passenger train, you've got intercity trains, you've got freight trains, etc. And we have to raise that level of awareness to that level, and we will share that information with you. Neil?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. One comment and one question. The comment is I do want to have an opportunity just to thank you for the speed by which you and your management team reacted to Valhalla. I assume that's not inappropriate to raise by seeing the speed by which you arrived at the scene, triaged the situation, and engaged the public and the first responders. I think the riders I represent appreciate that, and I do as well as a board member. Question that's related to your Operation Lifesaver point. I do believe there is a wider issue related to communication. I look to what the city has been doing with Vision Zero, billboards everywhere, commercials. They're constantly communicating to the public that this matters. I do not think communication by itself is something that's a side issue, and we live in a world now where media is ever present all the time, this, wherever it is. And so I'd like to continue to hit the refrain of the perception of safety. You know, before this incident, we were getting okay. It was some distance in Spite and Dival. But this, in the mind of the riders I represent, is material and adds to the concern, are we safe? I know we are being safe. You are taking all the measures humanly possible, but we've got to work on this perception. And I want us to take advantage of every communication tool possible. If David has to go visit every little school up and down Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess and talk to every kid, I don't know what it takes, but I want to talk about the plan to do that. Because until we start dealing with the perception of safety, that's going to be the hardest and longest problem we've got.
If a person doesn't know the hazard they're about to experience could be catastrophic. It won't affect behavior change. One of the first steps we're going to do is compare what the two railroads do, because Long Island's outreach is different than Metro North's. We want to pick best in class and combine them. In a prior life, which seems like a long time ago, Cheryl Kennedy and I were in the Office of System Safety at New York City Transit. It was 1983 or 84. And the number one issue within rail rapid transit was between car fatalities. People walking between cars on the major systems. At that time, it was New York, it was Chicago, it was Boston, it was Cleveland, Philadelphia, and they did not know the level of hazard that they were experiencing walking between cars. We had a case in Chicago where a woman carrying an infant and then a daughter in her arm walked between cars on an Easter Sunday, let go of the daughter between arms, and she passed away. And so the thing we did is we basically put a decal on the car, and what it basically said is more people die in between car fatalities than any other agency of injury in rail rapid transit. We change the behavior of people immediately. You can enforce it, you can issue summons, you can do a lot of things. But if you tell people that they have a likelihood of being severely injured or killed, it changes behavior. And maybe we need to do that, Neil, from a standpoint of just not bludgeoning them over the head, just say this is very important, you have to take aware of your surroundings, and these are the things you need to do from a standard. It has got to become a normal way of life. Polly?
Yeah, just a couple things. And I'm very glad you're talking to Joyce Rose. I got to work with her a lot when I was on Capitol Hill and at USDOT, and I think actually the board would love to meet with her. She has great expertise, and I think she'll do a lot to help us. And to get to the issue of what's the best technology is, of course, a grade separated crossing. I can just say, coming from USDOT, I got to run this Tiger program, and we got applications from states and cities all over the country. We probably got hundreds of millions, if not billions, of requests to do them. So clearly, it's a huge issue everywhere, and it's a resource question. And I know you will, as you say, Tom, you'll take a systems approach and see how we can prioritize. But there is a resource challenge there, which is national, and there's been talk for many years in Washington, and Joyce has been a part of it. If can we put more resources into grade crossings, and maybe we'll have some luck with that in the next couple of years. The Vision Zero thing, if we can be of any use, we have spent the past year doing a lot of, as Neil mentioned, a lot of public education. We've learned about some things that work and some that don't. Definitely going through schools has proved a very potent way of reaching people, because obviously when the safety of their children is involved, they really pay attention. So if we can be useful there, we would love to.
Beyond grade crossings is the issue of people really shouldn't walk on railroad right-of-ways, and it still happens to this day. It's for a whole host of reasons they do it, but they don't realize you can't even hear the train coming down on you. So it's grade crossing safety, it's right-of-way safety, it's all of the above. A couple last comments. Jonathan?
Okay. Thank you, Tom. I won't take the time to repeat a lot of what was said, and I agree so much with it, but I do want to support what you and Neil were just saying, and just point out that the need for increased and better communication also arises because of the change in all our lives, with all the distractions, with the instant media that everyone's sneaking peeks at and the like. So I think that given all the distractions that we have, perhaps it's easier for people to lose some focus. And so we need to increase and reinforce the communication to reflect the changing lifestyles that we have and bring it up in conformity with that. The old way worked with the old lifestyle. Maybe we have to think through and adjust. Thank you.
I'll make one comment. I didn't say it in my opening remarks. I'll be brief, but I do want to make the point. I spent a career in public transportation. A number of the people in the room have. I've investigated a number of different accidents. From a standpoint of working with the NTSB or other bodies of institutions that have that responsibility, whether it be emergency response or investigation, it's relatively straightforward. I won't tell you it gets easy, but it's pretty straightforward. The issue that is very hard, and it not only doesn't get easier, it gets tougher, is you walk on a car and there are people that started their day expecting to go into work, come home, they don't go home. And I think it was the governor made the comment in terms of sometimes it's the randomness of life. But whether it was the driver of the vehicle, the 5 people who are in that first car, their lives and their families' lives have been significantly affected. And we just need to do everything we can to do what we can to eliminate or significantly reduce the likelihood of those occurrences. But the conduct will have those accidents. David, you want to wrap with anything?
Just wanted to make a couple of very quick points, just in response to some of the questions and comments. And I guess one point, although there's always room for improvement with respect to education, outreach, and communication, I did just want to say that MTA railroads, and particularly Long Island Railroad, are extremely active in providing safety presentations that are based on Operation Lifesaver materials at civic meetings, street fairs, and other civic activities, and particularly in schools. So we do have an experience base that we can draw on there. And on a slightly different topic, even though certainly the point was made a few times that highway improvements and highway signage is the responsibility of state and local governments. That said, both of the MTA railroads are extremely knowledgeable about the crossings on our roadways and are extremely active in partnering and coordinating with those state and local governments and other authorities to ensure that all of our crossings are being continuously improved. There's a whole host of projects underway to make improvements throughout the year at crossings. So I just kind of wanted to make sure we didn't leave the impression that the crossings are out there sitting static and we're hoping for the best. We actually are working very, very diligently to continuously improve.
With that, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Seconded. Any further comments or question? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. We'll reconvene for the board meeting at 10 a.m.